So the session will start. Good afternoon, everybody. So the first section of presentations of the Passivhaus conference has just taken place, and now we're going to have a round for Q&As. So if you have any questions about any of the presentations that you've just had the opportunity of listening to during the first session, please ask them so that the speakers may give you an answer. Oliver, Pablo Correa has a question for you. With respect to the simulations that you carried out on Wi-Fi, trying to study the effect of the hydro water repellent treatment on brick facades, you said the durability was 5 or 6 years. So Pablo would like to know whether in the simulation you took into account this loss after 5 or 6 years in the calculations and what happened afterwards. Because when you're talking about water repellents, bearing in mind the condensation levels that could be in the building. Yes, well, when I said 5 years, I mean, I don't know how many years of durability a solution like that would have. I think it's beyond a 5-year period, but we can say that maybe after 5 years, the effect is a little bit less. You can say it's going to protect during the first few years more, basically. But when it comes to the simulations, we decided to do a 10-year simulation was not to see what happened on year 10. We do a simulation for a 10-year period because we want to make sure that the materials used reach a balance when it comes to their humidity content. So we do a 10-year simulation and study year 10. And that helps us to determine how safe and or reliable the solution we have used is. So I didn't reduce the effect on the year, every year annually. I mean, you can do it. You can study it on the first year, and the output results for year 1 can be introduced into year 2 in the different studies you carry out to see the water repellent capacity of the facade can be done. But in this particular case, I didn't do that calculation. Nonetheless, I do think it's an interesting field of research because there are experts in historical buildings who sometimes actually question whether this is making brick non-transferable. So it's an interesting solution. It could be studied, and maybe it should be studied more in depth, particularly in historical buildings, where you have a very thick wall on the outside and where you may get water coming in the creaks and fissures on the facade. The next question is for Michael Ingi from Soraya Lopez. She says that the window solution is wonderful with a lead treatment. So she would like to know, how did you manage to calculate the G and heat control factor of this glass, bearing in mind the actual glass, the glass that the original Windows had? So, Michael, how did you do the calculations for the new Windows?
Well, first of all,
please tell them that the translation takes a little bit longer.
Okay.
Please.
The translation will take a little bit longer.
Okay.
But first of all, I did not do the calculations. The Passivhaus consultant, Ed May, did. But this is a typical Passivhaus window. There is no change to the window. So it's actually quite easy. In this case, Zola was the company who made it. And it's such a thick amount of wood that's on the inside of the glass that we have plenty of space to put our leaded glass. In some cases, our New York City landmarks requested that the leaded glass be put on the outside, but in both cases, we've got enough of a flat reveal to easily put in a plastic spacer between the glass and the glass. our historic window. So it's actually quite easy. The positive to the passive house windows is they're so thick front to back that it gives you a little bit of meat to put this in.
Vale, pero entonces el valor G, ¿cómo lo simulasteis?
So how did you simulate the G value? Did you take it into account or didn't you take it into account?
We didn't need to take it into account because the value is being the value is being taken into account for the passive house window. This is just a decorative. You're really taking all of the performance requirements out of the leaded glass window. It's just a decorative element. I mean, the windows never performed well to begin with, not just for G value, but just for any reason. So you really they're becoming a decorative element.
Muy bien, pues nada, muchas gracias.
Thanks.
Fabulous, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Daniel Corby has quite a few questions for Manuel Trabanal from Daikin. He would like to know what you think about combi and heat recovery thermal systems. And he would also like to know what do you think about the materials that are used for these issues. Good afternoon. I'm going to start with the second question. I think it is very difficult to talk about right now about propane or CO2 or other derivatives of other types of gases. And please forgive me. I don't have a crystal ball to know what's going to happen in the future and what are going to be the alternatives that we're going to have available. But it is an efficient possibility with a low GWH value. So therefore, I think it is foreseeable, but I'm not to be used. And in industrial cooling, it has been used for very often. Ammonia has also been used, and in high production volumes for ACS as well, and also for hydrothermal heat pumps, it's also been used quite a lot. And in some cases, they're moving towards the use of propane. But in the future, to try to tell you something, I think that this is the way forward. And I think that in a 10 or 15-year term, this type of natural cooling agents will be used more often. But this is more a personal opinion. There are different strategies being used in the industry, and different companies are developing these types of solutions. But the Japanese manufacturers are betting for cooling agents like R32. But in any event, that they are very, very powerful and efficient cooling agents with low impact too. And the first question I think you asked me was about heat recovery with aerothermal heat pumps. Well, the heat recovery makes me talk about this issue of segmenting products as well as applications. Heat recovery is a technique that traditionally comes from the tertiary sector, from tools where you have high demands for heating and cooling, industrial processes where you have high cooling demands and to produce ACS. But in a housing unit, it's more complicated because the gap between the production of ACS and cooling is different. With combi heat pumps, we're talking about a term that covers many different systems, so it's not a very specific question either. There are aerothermal heat pumps that recover heat from the outside air with heat recovery systems. But I am for anything that is energy saving and recovering heat because I believe it is the way forward. But right now, from a technological standpoint, we're talking about technologies, and I'm probably repeating myself, that are not researched enough, and therefore we needed to wait a bit more to say something about them and judge them. Well, thank you, because, we've got lots of questions. I'm sorry. But quite a few questions lined up. For Carlos, from Hector Garcia Ruth. He's telling us that there's an outside layer, and he's wondering whether you could use an outside liquid membrane, and if you could use an SAT with anchoring. Well, in the case of Mallorca, this is an element that is screwed into the system, and yes, so it wouldn't create any types of problems, because we have to realize that this is not going to have an impact on hermeticity and airtightness, sorry. And then we have, we use a drill, and when we do that, we don't know whether we're going to break or not the back support when we're using the coach bolts. And that's why what we needed to do is to have filling for the drill to ensure airtightness.
Muy bien. Ahora para Marta de Comerlich, bueno, nos han identificado la persona que pregunta.
Okay, this is a question for Marta and Kommerling. It's very common for people to think about the window, but not so much about shutters, particularly if the team hasn't much experience. In the case of interior placement, in the example that you showed, is it possible that condensation may appear? Yes, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Well, it's always something that has to be checked. In some cases, we've had to deal with windows installed in this way, and there's been no risk of condensation in our projects, but it's a calculation that must always be made, both in terms of temperature and also other factors. So I believe that that's also something that has to be taken into account. In the case of interior insulation, yes, it's always important, depending on the construction solution and also depending on where we're going to install the window, it's always important to take into account that thermal bridge to consider the potential impact and potential condensation risks. Evidently, if the window is aligned with thermal insulation, then we will always be able to minimize the thermal bridge, but that doesn't mean that it's the only option. Okay, thank you very much.
Jordi,
a question from Paulo Correa. It's a question for you. The question is whether the calculation of interstitial condensation risk has been performed using dynamic Wi-Fi software or using the simplified method. He mentions, I think, laser, but I think it could be some type of thermal-based calculation. Well, good afternoon, good morning to everyone. The software that we use to calculate this is called BuildDisk, which allows us to enter the climate or weather data in any area that we're developing a project. And we always do this in this way in our department. In this case, a number of other simulations were carried out using other programs. It doesn't necessarily just have to be the Wi-Fi system that you mentioned, but in our department, we do use this program. We use that software for this solution and also for any other solutions in which we can present a proposed solution within the framework of a project. But yes, that's the one that we've been using and testing. Thank you. Okay, well, time's up. That's the end of the time for questions. I would like to thank all of the speakers for attending, speakers and also the public and participants and everyone who's also connecting remotely to the Congress. So the Q&A sessions ended. We'll now have a break, but if any of you have further questions about any of the presentations, then please send them in. The sponsors have stands and you can arrange meetings with the sponsors if you wish to clarify any of the issues or matters that have arisen in the presentations during this first block of presentations. And we look forward to seeing you later on at 6 o'clock with the second round of presentations in the Congress. Good afternoon, good morning to everyone.